those that have just attended, and apologies for those that had difficulty in getting in. So this morning we're going to talk about social media community management. Absolutely vital, especially in the Chinese community, across all social media platforms. So not just WeChat, Weibo, Little Red Book, Douyin, Youku, just across the board generally, with Chinese populations and Chinese consumers across B2B and B2C communities. So welcoming this morning, the lovely Sherry, who is a senior account manager here at Emerging Communications, and myself, CEO. Now, Sherry is very, very experienced at managing communities for a number of brands, especially in the luxury and retail sectors. And Sherry will be talking towards the end of this webinar about how we approach not just resource allocation, but processes around who and what to say to different situations, whether they be negative or positive. So firstly, the number one question that people ask me is, why is it important? And everybody focuses on the negativity around community management, but actually we're going to talk an awful lot today about building brand advocacy. I'm also going to talk about the common challenges that brands face in all sorts of sectors, not just retail and not just B2C communities, but in B2B as well, and how to manage your social community. And then we'll move it over to Sherry, who's going to talk about some of the frameworks and top tips to put in place to do it properly. So the number one most important thing is, why bother? And too many UK brands especially, and I know I've got some Europeans on this webinar this morning, it's absolutely paramount to remember that it is not just about controlling damage, it's not just about crisis management, it's also about building rapport. So building up those key opinion consumers, those KOCs that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on, and maintaining your brand image. Absolutely vital. And in fact, brands that have done a good job on community management in the last couple of weeks and months here in the UK during COVID and coming out of post-COVID have really shot ahead of their competitors. Even those that were challenger brands have done really well. So it can be a massive opportunity. It isn't just about controlling damage, although that's very, very important. We will talk about that later on. So is it just about replying messages? No, it's not. It's about rapport, reputation management, and relationship building. And we will talk a little bit later on about why that's even more important in China. But it is absolutely paramount that you have somebody managing your communities, ideally in-house, and if not, an agency that knows you very, very well, but somebody must be managing your communities. And we'll talk about how to do that. So let's look at some common challenges that brands face. And I've got people on this webinar and brands on this webinar from education, from retail, travel and hospitality, B2B, medicine. So a really eclectic mix. This is just some of the comments we translated from yesterday. I wanted to just do a snapshot. And as you can see, they really differ. Some of it's, I'm trying to put a payment through, it won't go. Some of it's, I'm trying to get into the country, or I want to return something, or I have questions for you. Now, the most important thing to understand is when one gets comments on social media or on communities across the board, so not just Weibo or WeChat, but across Douyin, Little Red Book, Youku, any of the communities you're active on, and even those that you're not, that you're being tagged on, it's very critical to know who to respond to quickly and with what message, and we will be talking about that in a little bit. But it's also really important, where possible, to have the answers ready to frequently asked questions. So for example, if you're in the retail sector, you must have within your WeChat account a menu bar or WeChat mini program that very clearly says how to return items, that really clearly says what your customer service policies are and who they can speak to. If you're in the travel industry, you'll have frequently asked questions at the moment around getting in and out of borders, around COVID protection, as well as the normal questions you might be asked, such as, do I need a visa and how do I get one? So it's just important to recognize that if you're getting frequently asked questions, to have something ready to respond to that. So There tends to be three different types of messages that we are used to dealing with across a multitude of platforms, with the three most common challenges being, how do I spend less time and make sure I manage these communities? And so how do I allocate resource? Who should answer these queries? How do I make sure it's done in a professional manner? And then if I'm going to respond and it's a tricky question that I maybe don't know the answer to, or it's maybe rude, what is the policy going to be behind that so that that can be delegated to somebody to answer? And then when do I think about there being a legal implication? Could it be that I have no experience of this question? Could it be that I'm slightly concerned about what this person is after? And we will talk about trolls and crisis management in a little bit, but one does need to know when to involve somebody within the organisation from a legal standpoint. So there are three simple rules, and we're going to take this across all sorts of messages, good and bad, across communities. The first one is time. Knowing how quickly one should respond. And it goes without saying that if it's a negative comment, depending on how bad the negative comment is, these are going to be top of your list. These have to be the ones you respond to really, really quickly. Cheryl will talk about this more later, but it's imperative to understand that if there's a negative comment on a platform in the Chinese communities, you will find it will spread really, really quickly. It needs to be taken offline and dealt with. If somebody's just saying, hi, I love your brand, that one doesn't have to be top of the list, that can be later. So having a plan around what sort of messages should be answered at what time is absolutely crucial. Secondly, and this is fairly critical, and I see this every single day, as do the team, when you delegate community management, make sure that they have a set of guidelines to work to. Make sure that one is never rude. One doesn't get into some kind of battle on a platform where everybody can see the answers. And we know who those brands are. There's been a number of massive crises caused by brands across Europe who have actually had worse PR by the way they've responded to negative comments than the comments themselves that could have been dealt with and taken offline. And thirdly, always to be consistent with the global brand and what it stands for. Yes, localized, but yes, on brand. So for example, if you're a luxury jewelry brand and your responses are in a tone and in a manner that is much more akin with a very cheap jewelry brand and it's perceived as rude, then you are going to have a problem. So you must make sure that you have an agreed set of guidelines before you're operating on any social media platforms. When we work with brands and we're running communities or running outreach on any of the social media platforms, even e-commerce platforms where we're running communities, we've always agreed who the key personas are we're talking to, the key target segments. Because knowing your tonality, your positioning, and the language you use, and I don't mean in Mandarin, that's a given, it must be in Mandarin. I'm talking about how you say things, in what tone and in what way to what personas. So for example, if you are talking to alumni within a university community, it's going to be very different to the way that we talk to an undergraduate, quite green, quite nervous, student that's looking to come to your university. So we have to be very careful not to be perceived as being patronizing. We have to be careful that we are talking in a language that the respondent is going to feel really comfortable and really cared for. And that means that you need to have a set of guidelines for each of those personas across each of the channels, right the way through to how often you post, with what mix of content, to what end in terms of what positioning and what tonality you're using. It's really, really crucial. And a set of crisis management processes too. So if you have somebody in charge of your community management within the organization, obviously you would not expect somebody junior to be dealing with a crisis. So they need to know what constitutes a crisis, what is really important that needs to be dealt with, and how it's escalated within the organization, and have responses already translated into Chinese and approved. All too often I've had to get board directors out of bed or off the golf course or at the weekend to respond to something because there were no guidelines in place. Make sure that you are not that brand. If it can be dealt with quickly, taken offline, you will be amazed at how you can build positive advocacy off the back of it. And we've seen it all too often. And translate frequently asked questions. We do this with all of our brands, so make sure that there is a set of frequently asked questions in Chinese within your WeChat mini program, within your menu bar, so that you'll find that a lot of the respondents won't even ask the question because they'll have found the answer. It will save so much time. Things such as check-in guides if you're an accommodation provider, returns policies if you're a retailer, application guides if you're universities, and this is just a small example of the sorts of policies and FAQs that you need to look to translate within your organisation, and just have them ready and have them available to your respondents and your community. It will just pay massive dividends in terms of lead generation and building advocacy. So let's now talk about how you go about managing positive and negative comments. So a comment arrives, first thing you need to do is step back and go, who is this person? Are they a KOC? Are they an advocate? Are they one of our platinum customers? Of which, if that is the case, this needs to be escalated to being very urgent. What are they saying and what are they looking for and what's their motivation? Could I point them to an FAQ? Could I point them to customer service on WeChat? How do I reply to this? Do I reply to this? Do I need to actually seek some kind of guidance? So be very clear what their motivation is. By understanding somebody's motivation, it's much, much easier to then know how to respond. Secondly, building advocacy. This is the crucial thing that an awful lot of brands tend to either ignore or not understand the importance of. It isn't always about negativity. If you can promote your community and nurture your community and build advocacy, what you're going to do is build customers that tell everybody about you for free. And we call them KOCs, and I'll talk about those a little bit later on. This is a crucial opportunity for brands at the moment. To nurture, build empathy, build connections, give your followers and your community a reason to stick around. Give them content they want, respond to their inquiries, point them in the right direction, and be seen to being very much a dialogue, not reactive or impassive, a dialogue with your followers so that you can build brand advocacy. Now, emotions in China are very, very important. Here in the UK, I would say not so much in other parts of Europe, but certainly in the UK, we can be perceived as being quite cold sometimes in our communication, which is something when you're having to work with the Chinese market that you have to rethink the way that you do things. Emotions, showing emotions is perfectly acceptable and wanted within Chinese communities. So if somebody writes a positive comment, express your gratitude. Say thank you for your support. We love having you in our community. Use emojis, calls to action, and making sure that they're very clear. Because don't forget, how you respond to one comment is really going to fuel how other comments will follow. If people see that you're responding in a positive way, you're proud, you're happy, you're excited, you're on brand, that is going to nurture your community to do the same. You can pretty much guide the way you want your community to go by the way that you respond. And that goes down to even casual engagement. You know, you need to decide at a brand level, you know, how casual you can be. Do you need to be formal? Can you be informal? What's that tone of voice? How do you speak to your community? Acknowledge their feelings and show your understanding. This is particularly important if you get the feeling from a comment from somebody within your community that they're feeling vulnerable or that they're trying to find information and they're frustrated. To empathize and to say, I'm so sorry you couldn't find that. Here is the link to where you'll find that information. I'm so sorry we couldn't help you. Here is somebody you can speak to on WeChat. You will find that that will actually have a positive impact on the community, thinking, wow, that was a quick response. Wow, they do care. Because what you want your community to do, and we've got a couple of examples here, I've changed their names, Sophie and Melissa, We want your community to start to share their experiences within your community on your platform, so that other people within the community will decide to become customers of yours. And quite often we call these KOCs, those that will share an awful lot on a regular basis, but nurturing your community will do this naturally. Whereas if you're impassive, if you don't respond to comments, if you don't respond and interact with your community, put quite simply, your community will be inactive. They will leave you, they will go and follow a competitor, and that's not what you want. So we've talked a lot about KOCs. I'm actually doing a webinar on this in September, specifically on KOCs and private WeChat groups and private groups. But KOCs are to be nurtured. They are your customers and your brand advocates that talk about you all the time on their own private platforms, as well as your community platforms. They're passionate about what you do. They will tell everybody about how amazing you are. And there's been a lot of changes in WeChat recently that has actually enabled a user to see on the top navigation what their friends are up to, what the trending videos are, what the trending topics are. So it's much easier to actually tag and nurture your KOCs than it ever has been before for brands. So make sure you know who these people are and make sure you nurture them, you look after them. We as an agency, we quite often when we're looking after brands communities, we've actually nurtured KOCs to such an extent that we might send them gifting, or we might say, we really, really appreciate your support. We'd love you to have this discount code. We'd love you to shop with us some more. So you can really nurture those people. Just be aware of who they are. And they're a great first step. As everybody knows in China, the importance of KOLs, key opinion leaders, the importance of media outreach to grow communities. But KOCs are one way of doing this organically. But you need to build your KOCs by having the right community management in the first place. So it's absolutely imperative. And just make sure that you answer questions. Like, for example, this was one from last week. I haven't received my order. Where is it? How long will it take to get a refund? Does this include taxes? And we have a lot of issues around UK brands exporting cross-border but not having proper logistics solutions. I'm doing a webinar on cross-border in September. And you might have questions around taxation. How come it's been held at the airport in China and I'm now paying tax? I'm not happy. And obviously what you don't want is you don't want those sorts of communications to be happening on an open platform. So firstly, acknowledge the question, take it offline to a private group. So what we call back end of WeChat or back end of a platform. Get back to them with a response straight away. We are so sorry about this. We will give you this in return, or we've tracked it down. We're going to make sure that we pay for the taxes and for any of the additional, problems we may have caused you. However you want to respond to it as a brand, but respond to it, because what you don't want is a slightly unhappy customer becoming a very, very unhappy customer, becoming an angry customer. And in China, that happens very quickly. And actually how you respond and showing empathy and showing that you understand and acknowledge their problem, you will find that you can actually create a KOC out of this customer very, very quickly. And bringing us on to something I mentioned earlier, which is the importance of FAQs. Absolutely crucial that you have got frequently asked questions or guides translated into Mandarin, easily accessible via WeChat ideally, that you can point people towards, or more importantly, they can find, so that they're not asking the same questions. This is particularly pertinent for retail and education, even accommodation in the education sector, where you are asked so many of the same sorts of questions. Where can I park my car, by way of example? How do I check in on my first day? What's going to happen when I arrive at Heathrow Airport? Will somebody meet me? These are questions we get asked time and time again, can be very easily highlighted in guides and in content within a WeChat platform. It will save an inordinate amount of time. And just, any kind of useful information that you can point them towards that they can access. Be aware that if you've got a UK-based site in Chinese on a subdomain, it isn't necessarily accessible via WeChat or from mainland China due to the firewall. So as much content as you can have within your WeChat community, within your other communities, easily accessible, the better. Even down to having somebody to answer any inquiries on WeChat person to person is also advisable. But just make sure it very clearly states who to contact with an inquiry or a complaint, that you've got FAQ pages, that you've got working hours, opening hours if you're a store. Basic information you would have in Europe and you would think nothing about needs to be readily available in Chinese. So we've talked a lot about building advocacy. We've talked a lot about KOCs and positivity and making sure you build communities. And I couldn't do this session without talking about crisis. Now, crisis management, a lot of brands are under the misapprehension that crisis management is something that happens if you have set up a channel on Chinese social media. This is not the case. Crisis management is going to happen if you have a customer who happens to be Chinese, whether they are in mainland China or traveling, and they have a bad experience and they don't get a resolution, it will become a crisis. We've seen it with Virgin Atlantic 6 years ago. We've seen it with D&G. We've seen it with countless brands. Make sure that even if you don't have Chinese platforms, or even if you don't have all of them, you have somebody doing social listening. You have somebody being aware of what's being said. Something very, very small, Angela, we changed her name. I haven't received my order. I sent an email. I didn't get a response. I'm now getting cross. This was for a birthday present for my father. What are you going to do about it? Nobody's responding. And then, of course, Angela got more and more irate. This was not one of our brands. This was an example of somebody who didn't respond. That could have been so easily tackled straight away, taken offline, and somebody nurturing and looking after Angela. And before you know it, she'll be telling everybody how amazing you are. It can sometimes be a lot worse. You can have an incident where a Chinese customer's in store and the shop assistant's rude to them, or something like food poisoning with the restaurant. Anything like this has to be escalated straight away to senior management according to guidelines you've agreed, and it must be dealt with as a matter of priority. And I don't mean you wait the weekend out. I mean even at the weekend. I mean even late at night UK time, because we're talking about a 7-hour time difference with China at the moment. Deal with it and know how to deal with it before it even happens. Have a crisis management plan. You do not want something going viral overnight when you're asleep in the UK. So make sure you have got a plan for that. Now, obviously, the bigger the brand, the more the resource they're going to have. But if you have got Chinese customer base and the Chinese market's important to you, then this has to be a number one priority. If it isn't, then you could literally damage your brand and obliterate your brand overnight, as so many brands have done. So this has to be a number one priority for you to do. And if you don't know what you're doing, talk to an expert, talk to an agency, talk to a consultant like us or somebody that you trust to put together some guidelines for you. Now, increasingly, with the escalation of Chinese social media, it's a fabric of life in China. I mean, you can't operate in China without it. So are the increased number of trolls. We've all had them. I have them on LinkedIn. Everybody has trolls. The more notoriety that you get, the bigger your communities, the more likely this is to happen. It could just be somebody is just making your life difficult because they're a competitor. I see that a lot. And they change their name for the purposes of not appearing to be a competitor, but that's clearly what they are. It could be that they are genuinely getting some pleasure out of it, or it could be that they just want to slander you in some way. If you're in any doubt, speak to your legal team in-house or externally about what you should do. Be careful, because what trolls want is they want interaction. They want to be goaded. If at all possible, just take it offline, take it off of the platform. They won't want that, that that has to be what you have to do. At the moment, there's a lot of political shenanigans going on, and so this is increasingly happening on platforms. It's something that's very hard for a brand to control, but leaving it and ignoring it's the worst thing you can do. You really do need to have a plan for this. And it could be something very simple that escalates. And I would actually say that trolls just need to be part of your crisis management plan. So I am now going to stop talking, be pleased to know, and move over to wonderful Sherry. Now, Sherry is one of my amazing community management team at Emerging Communications, and she works specifically in the retail and luxury sectors. And Sherry has worked now on countless brands, managing communities and building advocacy in KOCs. So I'm now going to move over to Sherry, who's actually going to talk about some frameworks you as a brand can put in place to manage resource and to create some processes around community management. Thank you, Sherry. Over to you.
Thank you, Dominica. So as Dominica mentioned, we've talked about lots of different comments, like positive comments, negative comments, or questions, or even trolls that you need to manage. Ideally, we would like to reply all the messages or all the issues right away. But in reality, actually, we will receive massive messages that you don't really know which one you need to reply first. So in order to make sure that your community management is very effectively managed, actually, there are some tools we will like to share you. So this is a metric that I would recommend that we can think about. So the horizontal is impact and the vertical is urgency. So by thinking about how much it will impact your brands, your services, your products, and how urgent it is to decide which one you need to reply first. So you can make sure that you have the orders and you know which one is the first priority. So in this case, like negative comments and complaints might be the first one you need to deal with. Okay, and next slide. So when we say negative comments, actually negative comments have different priorities as well. You can have existing customers, they are waiting their orders, so they've already paid. Or you can have customers, they are share bad experiences in the past, so they don't really have something on hold. So in this case, which one you need to manage first? Obviously, the one that is paying the money and waiting for the orders. So this is one of the examples I would like to share. And also for like trolls or other negative comments, we need to think about, should we ignore it? Is it like talking about something, do you need to behave of your brands, or should this one be escalated to other team members? So for a good community managers, you actually need to provide a good channel, not just replying all the messages, because your company is huge. So you have different departments to deal with different questions. So the thing you need to do is to identify, is this what you need to reply, or which department you need to redirect your customers to. And these are different techniques we would like to share. For example, you can ignore, you can delete if that is really not very appropriate. You can reply and give them a message saying that I received your message and I have contact our like customer service team, and they will contact you in one day or very soon. Or you can also put that public message into private. You can DM them and say that I've received your questions or your inquiries, but for the you need to share some personal information with me, so we need to put it in private. So by using these techniques, you can make sure that the person you are dealing with and also the community, that all those people can watch you on your platforms, know you are dealing with all the questions. And for the positive message, they won't be that urgent. So you can reply, you can like, you can reward, you can also have fun with them using emojis to build trust and to build friendship with your followers. Next slide. So these are the top tips we would like to share. First is to plan, so you have agreed guidelines which will be aligned with your tone of voice and also your brand personalities and your global guidelines. And you have an agreed guides and FAQs put inside your menu bars, your other social media platforms, and also to think before you reply, because you are not just replying the customer, you are also replying to all the followers. They can see your answers. And the third one is identify different scenarios and use our techniques to make sure which one needs to be prioritized. And also use multiple approaches. So for example, negative, how you need to deal with negative comments, how to deal with questions, trolls, how to deal with positives, comments.
Thank you very much, Sherry. So what we're going to do now is we've had a number of questions from the audience I'd like to ask you, if that's okay, just putting you on the spot there. And very useful, Sherry. Those two frameworks I know we use a lot and brands have found really useful, and hopefully the audience will too. So the first question has come from a brand, and basically they've asked, what a very good question actually, why do negative comments escalate so quickly in China, much quicker than they would in the UK? So what's your answer to that?
For me, I would say, especially for China, we need to think about peer communications. So peer communication means they talk to each other very frequently, especially in China market. So they like to share their shopping tips, their shopping experiences online with their first year friends, even though they only have like 100 or 200 followers, but they just like to share everything online. So sometimes I think some of the brands who fail to manage this is because they underestimate the speed and the power of their communities. So when something goes wrong and your customer service team or your community managers don't spot it and couldn't resolve it right away, it scales up really, really quickly. So I think, yeah, that's the reason why you need to make sure that you manage your community very effectively and very strategically, and you have prioritization tools, and to make sure that they know you care about them, and you show how you respect their experiences and their after purchase experiences as well.
I concur with that. I would actually say that China, the biggest opportunity a brand has is peer-to-peer recommendation from your brand advocates. But if you don't nurture your communities, and all too often brands will spend a lot of money on an advertising agency and have very expensive advertising in China, and they'll have a very junior member of staff managing their communities, which for me is bonkers, because it's your brand advocates that are going to be effectively your free marketing. So I totally concur. And I think in answer to the question about why does it escalate so quickly, it's a negative and a positive, but use it as a positive and nurture your communities, because they will become your free brand ambassadors and grow you organically. So the next question, Sherry, which I think is probably best if you answer it. How can a negative comment be turned into a positive opportunity? We were talking about this earlier on this morning, actually.
Yes, so I think we shouldn't see this one as a threat or a challenge. We need to see this as an opportunity, especially for Chinese audiences. So it is when you are dealing with some negative comments, it is actually a chance for you to present your delicate team, especially for the Chinese customers. So they will know that you actually have a very powerful service team, especially for them. So they can feel that you really care about them. And this whole process, from solving the problem to, from knowing the problem to solving it, they will feel they are being taken care of. Yeah. And after that, they will share their reviews and how they've been treated online again. And most of them are KOCs, as we mentioned, and those KOCs will use the peer communications to make it everywhere. So I think when we have any negative comments, it is a good opportunity for us to showcase how we care about them and how many resources we have whenever, and then we can build trust and authority. So they will start to become have a stronger connections with us.
Thank you. I think that's fantastic. And there's one final question which I will answer, which it's actually very, very commonly asked. There's no simple answer, but I will try. And what somebody's asked is, where do I start with crisis management guidelines? So what I would say is this, and I've just literally had to come up with the answer right here and now. So there are three main things that will impact on how you go about writing your crisis management guidelines. This also includes trolls, by the way. And they are, what market are you in? What context should your communications be in? And who are your customers? So all three of those are crucial. So for example, if you're in the travel and hospitality sector, you can then think about what are the likely crises that will hit our business that we cannot control, but we will have to respond to. You need to think about who are your stakeholders. So for example, if you're in travel and hospitality, it will be everybody. It will be customer service right the way through to whoever is in check-in, whoever is going to be, if it's an airline, for example, your cabin stewards, airport handlers, everybody in your stakeholders that's going to come in contact with a customer has got to be thought about. So what could possibly go wrong? And you start doing something, what I call scenario planning. You create scenarios that could possibly happen. You do a risk assessment and you score it. So for example, somebody is rude to a Chinese passenger on an aircraft and you're an airline, that is probably a number one scoring. So in other words, that has got to be prioritized as a number one red alert. Whereas if somebody, for example, is on an airline and they didn't get the tuna sandwich because it was out of stock, that's not really a number one alert, that's a number five. So you have a scoring according to the type of customer and according to what interaction they're going to have with your staff across the organization. You make sure that it's on brand, it's aligned with your brand guidelines, that it is able to be resourced, so it is feasible. There is no point having a crisis management plan if nobody in the organization is going to deploy it. So making sure it will work 24/7 and making sure that there are people responsible for knowing what to say, and getting everything away from that platform in the public domain to private messaging is absolutely crucial. So every brand that we've written crisis management guidelines and social media guidelines for has been different. And it is very much driven by the market. And it's very much driven by the complexity of your organization in terms of touch points. So if you are a retailer and you only have bricks and mortar and you're only selling offline, then it's going to be the sales staff and the store staff that sell to your customers. So you've only got really one channel to worry about. But if you are e-commerce as well, then you're obviously going to have to think about returns. You're going to have to think about logistics and taxation and all those other things. So you need to really think about it in the context of your own business. That really then helps you to think and scenario plan the way we've had to do as a business, and any business has to do. You work within your commercial department and within your legal framework to work out what the scenarios are and map out what the responses should be. Ideally, work with an expert in the Chinese market and have everything translated and have an escalation plan. And when we've done that with brands, it's been highly successful. And we've ended up building advocacy out of very, very disgruntled customers. So that's my response to that one. I'm just going to check. I don't believe we have any more Q&As. If any of our participants have any more Q&As they want to send over now, that would be fantastic. And if not, we will wrap up in a minute. Just to say that there are our contact details. If anybody wants to reach out, I'm on LinkedIn. There's my mobile and email, and there's Sherry's. If anybody has any questions or follow up, we will be putting this video on our YouTube channel. So please follow us and subscribe to Emerging Communications on YouTube, because we are always putting our webinars, vlogs, podcasts with experts 2 or 3 times a week. We're populating that. We launched it a couple of weeks ago. And next week, we will be doing our webinar on Douyin's Little Red Book. We have 200 people signed up for that already. Very, very popular. Now, Little Red Book and Douyin are particularly popular platforms now, relatively new, last 24 months, I would say. They've had particular notoriety. We'll also talk about Weibo, WeChat, Youku, all the major platforms, just basically the basic 101 of what you need to know about each of those platforms and how they can be used. And later on in September, Marie and myself will be doing a webinar on each of those individual channels in a lot more depth. So please sign up for that at emergingcomms.com. And we have all of our events on there. It's also, you'll find it on Eventbrite as well. So if nobody has any more questions, I'm going to wrap up for today and say a massive thank you to Sherry for your time putting together this presentation, which was very, very useful for everybody concerned. And I know that it's very, very nerve-wracking when it's not your first language. You did a massive well done to you today. It's your first webinar. And everybody thanks you for it, and your English is superb, much better than my Chinese. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and stay safe, and see you soon.